Listen, Cuckold, if your life means anything to you, you'd better accept the situation and stay out of my way. Logan spat in my face, while his goons had me pinned to the ground, my ribs throbbing with pain. I could barely stand, blood dripping from my lip, but I wasn't about to back down. Your wife is mine now, and I like it that way. In that moment, something snapped inside me. All the lies, the fake smiles, the betrayal, it all exploded into a rage I'd never felt before. I could have stayed down. I could have let it go. But some things just can't be forgiven. I leaned forward, my mouth tasting of iron, and smirked. I accept your challenge, I whispered. Now, you play by my rules. That moment was the breaking point. Everything had escalated too quickly to think clearly, but how did I end up on my knees, staring down the man who claimed to own my wife? It all started a few weeks ago, when my entire world shattered with one innocent-looking text. I didn't know that night would be the start of my personal hell. I wasn't always the guy who could stare down a group of thugs, bloody and broken, with a smirk on my face. A few weeks ago, I was just David, the husband, the guy who thought his life was normal. You wake up, go to work, come home, and you trust the person next to you is doing the same thing, building something together. It never crossed my mind that everything we had was a lie. It started innocently enough. Kelly had been working late more often than usual, but I didn't think much of it. We've been married 10 years, a little space is normal. I figured she was just stressed. But then, one night, her phone buzzed while she was in the shower. I wasn't the type to snoop, but that night something felt off. I glanced at her phone, expecting a message from a friend or maybe one of her coworkers. But it wasn't. The name Logan flashed across the screen, followed by a text that made my heart sink into my stomach. Can't wait to feel you again tonight. Last time was perfect. I stared at the message, trying to make sense of it. I thought I knew Kelly better than anyone. But this? This wasn't the woman I married. My hand started to shake as I opened her phone, scrolling through dozens of messages. There was no way to misinterpret it. They weren't talking about work. They weren't talking about anything innocent. This was months of betrayal wrapped up in cold, hard facts, and I was too blind to see it until now. That text was a ticking time bomb in my chest, and the more I read, the closer I was to exploding. Every message made it clearer, she wasn't just cheating, she was leading a whole other life behind my back. Dinners, weekends, hotel rooms. Logan wasn't just some fling. He was a part of her life, and I had been nothing but a bystander. The shower turned off, and suddenly I was aware of the world around me again. I could hear Kelly humming to herself in the bathroom like it was just another normal night. But nothing about this was normal anymore. When she stepped out, wrapped in a towel, with that same smile she always gave me, I couldn't keep it together. I didn't wait. I didn't try to plan out what I was going to say. I just stood there, holding her phone up like it was a weapon. Her face went pale the second she saw it. "What's this?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper, though it took every ounce of my willpower to keep it from shaking. Kelly froze, and for a second, I thought I saw guilt flicker in her eyes. But then, just as quickly, she recovered, putting on that same mask I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Babe, it's not what you think," she said, her voice smooth but hollow. "Logan's just a guy from work. We've been working on this big project, and don't." My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "Don't you dare lie to me right now." I threw the phone on the bed and took a step toward her. She opened her mouth to say something, probably to spin some web of excuses, but I wasn't having it. "You've been seeing him for months," I said, my words coming out faster now, harder. "Behind my back. You've been lying to me this whole time. And now, you're going to stand there and tell me it's just work?" Kelly sighed, like she was exhausted by the conversation, like I was the one being unreasonable. David, it's not a big deal. I didn't think you'd react like this. You're blowing it way out of proportion. I felt a cold rush of disbelief wash over me. Not a big deal? I couldn't even comprehend the words coming out of her mouth. Not a big deal? You've been cheating on me, and that's not a big deal? It's not like I'm leaving you for him, she said, crossing her arms. Logan's just different. He gives me something you don't. But I'm still here, aren't I? I could hardly believe what I was hearing. She said it so casually, like she was explaining why she picked a different restaurant for dinner. I wanted to yell, to scream, but all I could do was stand there, stunned, as she dismantled our life with just a few cold, heartless words. Kelly moved closer, her voice suddenly softer, like she thought she could reason her way out of this. Look, David, I didn't mean to hurt you. It's just, things between us have been a little stale, you know? I needed something exciting. But it doesn't mean I don't care about you. Exciting? That's what this was to her. A thrill? My hands clenched into fists at my sides, every muscle in my body tensed with anger. And what about me? I asked, my voice shaking now. What about us? You didn't think about that while you were off with him? She shrugged, like the question didn't even matter. I'm still here, aren't I? It was that moment that I realized just how far gone she was. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I loved, was gone. This person standing in front of me, looking at me like I was the problem, wasn't my wife. Not anymore. I turned away, grabbing my jacket from the chair. I needed to get out, to clear my head before I said something I'd regret. But as I reached the door, she spoke again, her voice flat and emotionless. If you can't handle it, that's on you, David. Logan gives me what you never could. You'll just have to accept that. Those words echoed in my mind as I slammed the door behind me. Accept it? Not a chance. And that's when everything changed. I walked out into the cold night air, my mind racing in every direction. Kelly's words echoed in my head, you'll just have to accept that. Accept it? She seriously thought I'd just roll over and let her carry on with her little affair? I could feel the rage building inside me like a firestorm, but I wasn't going to let it consume me. Not yet. I needed a plan. I needed to think clearly. But more than anything, I needed to hit back. I got into my car and drove, but I wasn't thinking about where I was going. The city lights blurred past me as I sped through the streets, replaying every moment of the last few months in my head. Every late night at work, every excuse, every lie. How could I have been so blind? Eventually, I found myself outside an old bar on the edge of town. I hadn't been here in years, but it felt like the right place to clear my head. I walked inside, the warm, smoky air hitting me as I made my way to the bar. I sat down, ordered a whiskey, and stared at the glass in front of me, swirling the amber liquid around while my mind churned. I couldn't let Kelly win. I couldn't just accept her betrayal like she was asking me to. This wasn't something you accept. This was something you fight. Something you destroy. Halfway through my drink, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around and saw Jake, my old friend from work. We hadn't spoken much in the last year, but we used to be close. He looked at me and raised an eyebrow, sensing something was off. David, man, you look like hell. What's going on? I sighed, rubbing my hand over my face. I wasn't sure if I was ready to spill the whole thing, but I needed to get some of it out before I exploded. It's Kelly, I muttered, staring down at my drink. Jake frowned, pulling up a chair next to me. What about Kelly? I took a deep breath. She's been seeing someone else. Behind my back. 4 months. Jake blinked, his face hardening. Are you serious? That's messed up, man. What are you going to do about it? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? I had no idea. Part of me wanted to just leave her, walk away from the wreckage, but another part of me, the part that felt the rage boiling under the surface, wanted to do something more. Something that would make them both regret ever crossing me. I don't know, I said finally. But I'm not just going to sit back and let it happen. Jake leaned in, lowering his voice. Look, I know a guy. He's not exactly on the right side of the law, but if you're looking for a way to settle this without getting your hands dirty, he can help. I looked at Jake, my mind spinning. Was this what it had come to? Meeting shady characters to settle my problems? But then I thought of Logan, of his smug face, of the way he claimed Kelly like she was some kind of trophy he'd won. My fists clenched again. Maybe I needed to play dirty. What's his name? I asked, my voice cold. His name's Ray. He's done some work for people I know. Let's just say, he knows how to send a message. Jake scribbled a number on a napkin and handed it to me. If you're serious, give him a call. I pocketed the napkin, downed the rest of my whiskey, and stood up. Thanks, Jake. I'll think about it. But as I left the bar, I knew I wasn't just thinking about it. I was going to do it. I wasn't going to let Logan get away with this. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let Kelly walk all over me like I was nothing. The next day, I woke up early, my head still buzzing from the whiskey and the anger that hadn't subsided. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, Ray's number staring back at me. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to bring someone else into this mess to settle the score? Then I remembered Kelly's words, that smug look on her face when she said, "Logan gives me what you never could." That did it. I dialed the number. Ray, a gruff voice answered on the other end. Ray, this is David. I need your help. The next few days passed in a blur. Ray and I met at a dingy diner on the outskirts of town. He was exactly the kind of guy I expected, rough around the edges, with a look that said he'd seen more than his fair share of trouble. But I didn't care about his past. I cared about what he could do for me now. I want him to feel what I felt, I told Ray over coffee. I want him to know what it's like to have everything ripped away. Ray nodded, sipping his drink. I can do that. But it's going to cost you. I don't care about the cost. Ray smirked. Good. Then we'll make sure he knows who he's messing with. A few nights later, Logan got his message. I don't know exactly what Ray did, and I didn't ask. All I know is that Logan showed up at our house, beaten and bloody, screaming at me through the door. You think this changes anything? You think you can scare me? Logan shouted, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and pain. I'm not going anywhere, David. You're nothing compared to me. I opened the door, calm as ever, staring him down as he stood there, barely able to stand. You're in my world now, Logan. And this is just the beginning. He tried to lunge at me, but Ray's work had left him too broken. He stumbled, falling to his knees on my porch, gasping for air. Stay out of my way, I said, leaning down close enough for him to hear. Because if you don't, next time, it'll be worse. And just like that, I closed the door on him. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Logan's bloodied face staring up at me from the porch should have been satisfying. It should have been enough to calm the storm inside me, but it wasn't. Not even close. Watching him squirm, barely able to stand, only scratched the surface of what I wanted. Kelly was still upstairs, probably oblivious to the whole scene playing out just below her, or worse, watching from the window, silently rooting for Logan. I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. The woman I loved had become a stranger, and every memory I had of her was tainted by that smirk she gave me when she said, "You'll have to accept it." No, I wasn't accepting anything. I shut the door in Logan's face, feeling the adrenaline still coursing through me. He might have been beaten, but this wasn't over. It couldn't be. This wasn't just about him. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. I didn't just want revenge anymore, I wanted control. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down at the table. I needed to think. Logan wasn't going to disappear just because Ray roughed him up a bit. I knew his type. He'd come back, probably dragging Kelly with him like some sort of twisted prize. That's when I realized. I needed to confront the real problem. Kelly. Upstairs, she was living like none of this mattered. Still in our house, still playing by her rules, like she could have both of us dancing to her tune. It was time to change that. I went upstairs, each step heavier than the last. The door to our bedroom was slightly ajar, the dim light from her bedside lamp casting long shadows across the hallway. I pushed it open and found her lying on the bed, scrolling through her phone without a care in the world. She didn't even look up. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low and steady, but there was a sharp edge to it now. A finality. Kelly sighed, still not looking at me. "David, I'm tired. Can we not do this again? I told you already. I just sent Logan away," I cut her off, the words coming out colder than I intended. "He was on our porch, bloody, beaten, and screaming like a coward." That got her attention. She looked up at me, her phone forgotten, her eyes narrowing. "What the hell did you do?" "What did I do?" I laughed bitterly. "I did what I had to. I protected what's mine. Something you clearly don't care about." Kelly sat up, swinging her legs over the edge of the bed. "You had someone hurt him? Are you out of your mind, David? This isn't who you are." "You have no idea who I am anymore," I shot back. "You've been too busy playing house with Logan while I've been sitting here, blind to everything." She stood up, and for the first time in a long time, I saw real anger in her eyes. Not the cold, indifferent mask she'd been wearing for weeks. This was raw, and it was aimed directly at me. "You think this fixes anything?" she spat. "Beating up Logan? That's not going to change what's happening. You're pathetic, David. That's why this happened in the first place." That word, pathetic, hit me harder than any punch could. It was like she'd just dropped a bomb in the middle of the room and watched it explode. But instead of backing down, something inside me snapped. "Pathetic?" I repeated, stepping closer. "You want to talk about pathetic? Let's talk about you. You, sneaking around like some cheap whore behind my back, thinking you could have it all. You thought I'd just sit here and take it?" Kelly's jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. For the first time, she was speechless. Good. It was about time she felt the weight of this. "You said I had to accept it," I continued, my voice rising now. "You said Logan gives you what I can't. Fine. Take him. I don't care anymore. But you're not going to live in my house, under my roof, pretending this is some kind of twisted game you get to control." She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't let her. "You want to be with Logan? Go ahead," I said, my voice cold, calm. "But you're going to pack your things and get the hell out of here tonight. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here." Kelly blinked, clearly caught off guard by my sudden shift. She wasn't used to me being this direct, this decisive. For years, I'd been the guy who worked hard, paid the bills, and kept the peace. The guy who'd always tried to make things right. But not anymore. "You can't be serious," she finally said, her voice shaky now. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Go to Logan," I snapped. "You made your choice. Now live with it." Kelly stood there for a moment, processing everything. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to find a way out of this, but there wasn't one. Not this time. She wasn't going to talk her way out of this like she always did. Without another word, she turned and walked to the closet, pulling out a suitcase. She started throwing clothes into it, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. I stood there, watching, feeling a strange mix of anger and relief wash over me. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. The moment I finally took control. As she zipped up the suitcase and grabbed her things, she paused by the door, looking at me one last time. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice low and venomous. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "You will." And with that, she was gone. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The weight of her lies, her betrayal, it was lifting. But as I stood there in the silence of the empty house, I knew this wasn't over. Logan wasn't going to let this go. And neither was I. When Kelly walked out the door that night, it felt like a part of me had been ripped away. But instead of feeling lost or heartbroken, I felt something else, freedom. It was as if the fog that had been clouding my judgment for months finally lifted. But I knew deep down, the storm wasn't over. Not yet. The house was eerily quiet now, every creak in the floorboards louder than ever. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door she had just walked through. The memories of us, good and bad, flashed before my eyes. But those memories were dead now, burned away by her betrayal. The only thing left was Logan. This wasn't over. I wasn't going to just let him slither away like the coward he was. He had dragged me into a fight I never wanted, but now, I was in it. And I was going to finish it. I got up and paced the room, my mind racing with thoughts of how this would end. Ray's voice echoed in my head from our last meeting. "You want him to feel the pain you felt? I can make that happen." I had told him I wanted Logan to suffer, and Ray had delivered. But Logan wasn't the type to go down quietly. He would come back, and next time, he wouldn't come alone. The thought made my fists clench. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. If Logan wanted to bring the fight to me, I'd be ready. I picked up my phone and dialed Ray. "Ray," his voice was calm, as if he'd been expecting my call. "It's David. Logan's going to come after me. After tonight, there's no way he's going to let this go." Ray was silent for a moment before he spoke. "I told you this wouldn't be clean. Guys like Logan don't just disappear after a beating. They come back harder. What's your plan?" "I want you to find out everything you can about him. Every weak spot. I want to know where he lives, who he's close to, everything." Ray chuckled. "I like where your head's at. You're thinking smart. I'll get my people on it. But be ready. When you push a guy like Logan, he pushes back." "Let him try," I said, my voice cold. "This time, I'll be the one waiting." 2 days passed, and everything seemed unnervingly quiet. Kelly hadn't come back. No calls. No texts. The silence was almost worse than the fight itself. But I wasn't stupid. She was probably holed up with Logan, licking her wounds, trying to figure out what her next move would be. And then, late one evening, just when I thought the quiet might stretch on forever, there was a knock at my door. I opened it cautiously, my gut already telling me who it would be. Standing there, dressed in a sharp suit like he hadn't just been beaten within an inch of his life, was Logan. His bruises were still visible, a cut above his eye barely healed, but he was smiling. That smug, infuriating smile that made my blood boil. Behind him were 2 guys, big, built like tanks, the kind of guys who didn't say much but could break you in half without blinking. Logan walked forward, stepping into my house like he owned it. His goons followed, shutting the door behind them. "I told you, David," Logan said, his voice smooth and confident. "This isn't over. Did you really think a few broken bones were going to scare me off? I kept my face neutral, not giving him the reaction he wanted. "What do you want, Logan?" He smiled wider, looking around my living room, inspecting the place like he was sizing it up. "I want what's mine. And that's Kelly. You can throw a little tantrum all you want, but she's with me now." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You should have taken my warning and stayed out of this. But you didn't. And now, things are going to get ugly." I looked past him at the two goons flanking him. They were standing still, like statues, but I knew they weren't here for decoration. Logan wasn't here to talk. He was here to finish what he'd started. And I was ready. "You made a mistake, coming here," I said, my voice low and steady. Logan laughed, a cold, heartless sound. "The only mistake was thinking you had a chance. You're nothing, David. Kelly told me everything. You're weak. She never respected you, and now? She's mine. Accept it." I felt that familiar rage rising up again, the one that had been boiling under the surface since this whole nightmare began. But instead of exploding, I channeled it. My mind was crystal clear. "You're right," I said, stepping forward until we were inches apart. "I'm not the same guy I was. And that's bad news for you." Logan's smirk faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. He wasn't expecting me to fight back. He thought I was still the same guy who'd sit and take his threats. But that guy was gone. Without warning, I swung. My fist connected with his jaw, hard. He stumbled back, crashing into one of his goons, who instantly lunged at me. But I was ready. I ducked the first punch and slammed my elbow into his ribs. The guy let out a grunt of pain, doubling over just long enough for me to grab the vase off the coffee table and smash it across his head. He went down like a sack of bricks. The second goon was on me before I could catch my breath, grabbing me by the collar and throwing me across the room. I hit the wall hard, but I didn't feel the pain. All I could see was Logan, staggering to his feet, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, his eyes wide with shock. He hadn't expected this. I wasn't going down without a fight. The second goon came at me again, but I grabbed the nearest chair and swung it at his legs. He crumpled, and I turned back to Logan, who was now backing toward the door. "You think this is over?" Logan spat, wiping the blood from his face. "You think you can beat me?" I stepped forward, breathing hard, fists clenched. "I don't need to beat you, Logan. You've already lost. You just don't know it yet." Logan glared at me for a moment, then turned and bolted for the door, his men limping behind him. I stood there, heart pounding, watching them disappear into the night. This wasn't just a fight for Kelly anymore. This was a fight for me. And I wasn't going to stop until Logan was out of my life for good. As the adrenaline started to fade, I took a deep breath and sat down on the edge of the couch. This wasn't over. Logan would come back. He wouldn't stop until he had everything. But I wasn't afraid. Because now, I was the one in control. I sat there for a long time, catching my breath, the adrenaline slowly fading but the fire inside me still burning bright. Logan had slithered away, but he wasn't gone. I knew he'd be back. The thing about men like him is they don't take losses lightly. They come back harder, more vicious, and I had no intention of being caught off guard again. As the night crept in, I started thinking about what had to come next. Logan wouldn't just stop at a broken jaw and bruised ego. He'd regroup, maybe even try to hit me where it hurt. But that didn't worry me anymore. What worried me was how far Kelly was willing to go with him. She wasn't some innocent bystander. She was a key part of this, and she had a role to play in how this ended. I had to find her before Logan used her to get to me again. The house felt empty without her, but not in the way you'd expect. There wasn't a hollow sadness like some part of my life was missing. It was more like I'd finally swept the floor clean. The house was no longer infected with her lies, and I had a chance to rebuild what I'd let crumble. And step 1? Confronting the root of the problem. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Ray. I didn't know much about this guy, but I knew one thing: he got results. The conversation with him earlier replayed in my head. He had mentioned digging deeper into Logan's life, and I was sure by now he had something for me. "Ray, it's David. What did you find?" I said when he picked up. "You're not going to like this," Ray replied, his voice gravelly, as if he'd just woken up from a nap or come off a bender. "Logan's tied into some pretty nasty stuff. Not just your run-of-the-mill affairs. This guy has connections with people you don't want to cross." "I don't care about his connections. I care about getting him out of my life." "What's his weak spot?" There was a pause, then Ray's voice came back, a little more cautious this time. "His weak spot is Kelly." I felt a chill run through me. I had expected something like this, but hearing it out loud confirmed my worst fears. "What do you mean?" "He's using her, David. She's not just a side fling to him. She's leverage. I don't know what kind of sick game he's playing, but Logan's not just keeping her around for kicks. He's got something on her, something big." I gripped the phone tighter. What could he possibly have on her? Ray sighed. "I'm still digging into that, but from what I've gathered, it's more than just an affair. Kelly's been involved in some shady business with him. She's not the victim here, but she's definitely trapped." I didn't know whether to be angry or disgusted. The woman who'd stood beside me for 10 years was tangled up in something dangerous, and instead of coming to me, she'd run off with the guy who was manipulating her. But was I surprised? Not after what I'd seen in the last few weeks. "What do you want me to do, David?" Ray asked. "You want me to keep looking into her, or are you ready to cut your losses and let this thing play out?" For a moment, I considered it. Letting go. Walking away from the entire mess and starting fresh somewhere else. But that wasn't an option. Not now. Kelly was still my wife, legally, anyway, and as much as I hated what she'd done, I couldn't just leave her to be Logan's pawn. "No," I said firmly. "Keep digging. I want to know exactly what he has on her." Ray agreed, and I hung up, sitting back on the couch and staring at the ceiling. What was Kelly into? What had she hidden from me all these years? The Kelly I knew, or thought I knew, couldn't have fallen into something this deep by accident. Which meant she had to be in on it, or she was too deep to get out on her own. Either way, I was going to find her and get answers. The next day, I woke up feeling like a man on a mission. Logan and Kelly weren't going to keep playing their little game without consequences. If Logan thought he could waltz into my life, wreck my marriage, and get away with it, he had another thing coming. I dressed quickly, grabbed my keys, and headed straight for the one place I knew Logan would be, the club. Logan owned a high-end nightclub on the outskirts of the city. It was his pride and joy, a place where he flaunted his wealth and connections. That's where he did business. And tonight, that's where I was going to confront him. I parked my car down the street and watched from the shadows as a line of expensive cars pulled up to the entrance, letting out people dressed in designer clothes, laughing and flaunting their status like gods in their own little world. I wasn't there to mingle with them. I was there for Logan. I slipped in through a side entrance, keeping my head down. The bass from the music pounded through my chest as I navigated through the crowded club, my eyes scanning for Logan. He was here. I knew it. He'd never miss a night to show off. Finally, I spotted him in the VIP section, surrounded by his usual entourage, including Kelly. She was there, looking more distant than I'd ever seen her. She wasn't laughing, wasn't engaged in the conversations around her. She looked trapped. It was now or never. I pushed my way through the crowd, not caring about the looks I got as I stormed toward the velvet ropes separating the VIPs from the regular people. Logan spotted me just as I approached, his face twisting into a sneer. "David," he said, standing up from his seat. "You don't learn, do you?" "Get her out of here," I said, pointing at Kelly, who turned and looked at me, her eyes widening. She stood up too, but didn't move, frozen in place like she was waiting for permission. Logan smirked, stepping closer to me, his voice low. "She's not leaving, David. She's mine now. You've already lost this fight." I didn't respond. Instead, I did the one thing Logan never expected. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the gun I'd bought earlier that day, and aimed it directly at his chest. The room went silent, the music still pounding in the background but no one moving. Logan's smirk faded, replaced with something that almost looked like fear. "I'm not here to negotiate," I said, my voice calm, steady. "You're going to let her go. Or I will end this, right here, right now." The tables had turned, and for the first time, Logan was no longer in control. The cold weight of the gun in my hand felt both terrifying and powerful. It wasn't something I had ever imagined myself doing, walking into a nightclub, pulling a gun on the man who had ruined my life. But here I was, standing in front of Logan with the barrel aimed squarely at his chest. He didn't smirk anymore. He wasn't the smug bastard who'd thrown his affair with my wife in my face. No, now he was just a guy staring down the barrel of a loaded gun, and the reality of the situation was starting to sink in. The crowd around us froze, the beat of the music still thumping in the background like some twisted soundtrack to this showdown. Logan's goons, who were normally quick to jump in, didn't move. They could see this wasn't the time for their usual tactics. One wrong move and everything would change in an instant. Kelly, standing a few feet behind Logan, looked at me with wide eyes, her face pale. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I saw something real in her expression. It wasn't love or even guilt, it was fear. But it wasn't for me. It was for herself. "David, put the gun down," Kelly finally said, her voice trembling. "This isn't you. You're not this guy." I glanced at her, and for a moment, my resolve wavered. Was she right? Was I about to cross a line that I could never uncross? But then I thought about everything, every lie, every betrayal, every time she had looked me in the eyes and told me nothing was wrong while she was sleeping with this piece of garbage. This was me now. I wasn't going to be the guy who rolled over and took it anymore. "Let her go, Logan," I said, my voice steady, but I could feel the tension in my body like a coiled spring. "Or this ends badly for you." Logan swallowed hard, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was calculating, trying to figure out how to spin this, how to take back control. He had always been the one in charge, the one who made the rules. But now, with a gun pointed at his chest, the game had changed, and he knew it. "You really think you can walk out of here after this?" Logan said, his voice low, but I could hear the crack in his confidence. "Even if you shoot me, my people will tear you apart. You won't be around to see it," I shot back. "I'm giving you one chance. Let Kelly go and walk away." Logan hesitated, glancing over his shoulder at Kelly, then back at me. He was weighing his options, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. But he didn't know the truth. I wasn't bluffing. Not anymore. "You're making a big mistake, David," he said, his voice growing colder. "This isn't going to fix anything. She doesn't want to be with you. She made her choice." I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, the gun still trained on him. "This isn't about fixing anything. This is about ending it." For the first time, I saw real fear flicker across Logan's face. He wasn't used to this, someone else taking charge, someone else calling the shots. He was always the predator, and now, he was realizing what it felt like to be the prey. Kelly took a step toward me, her hand outstretched, pleading. David, please, don't do this. You don't understand, Logan has connections. If you pull that trigger, it won't just be him. They'll come after you. I glanced at her, my anger flaring up all over again. After everything she'd done, she was still trying to protect him. Not us. Him. That's when it hit me. She wasn't the woman I married anymore. Hell, maybe she never had been. She had chosen her side, and it wasn't mine. David, listen to her, Logan said, trying to sound confident again. You pull that trigger, and you won't make it out of this city alive. My people will find you. The threat hung in the air, but it didn't faze me. Logan still thought he had power here, still thought he could manipulate the situation. But I was done being manipulated. Here's the thing, Logan, I said, my voice low and calm, you don't scare me anymore. You think because you've got connections, you're untouchable? You're wrong. People like you always think you can get away with it. But there's always a reckoning. Logan's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, but there was none. He had nowhere to run. Suddenly, Kelly stepped between us, her hands raised, her voice frantic. Stop it. Both of you. This isn't going to solve anything. But she was wrong. This would solve everything. She didn't understand what was really at stake here, what had been destroyed. Move, Kelly, I said, my voice cold. No, she shouted, her eyes blazing with fear and anger. I'm not letting you do this. You're going to ruin everything. You can't fix this by killing him. I stared at her, the woman I had spent 10 years of my life with, and I realized something in that moment. She wasn't worth it. None of this was. Logan, Kelly, the lies, the betrayal, it had all been a slow poison, eating away at me, turning me into someone I didn't recognize. I wasn't going to be that person anymore. I lowered the gun. Logan let out a breath he'd been holding, but his relief was premature. I wasn't done yet. You're right, I said, my voice still cold. I'm not going to fix this by killing him. I took a step back, tucking the gun into my jacket. But this isn't over, Logan. You can have Kelly, but you're going to pay for what you did to me. And when I'm finished with you, you'll wish I had pulled the trigger. Logan's eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. He knew better now. He had seen a glimpse of what I was capable of, and that fear wasn't going to fade easily. I turned and walked out of the club, my heart pounding, but my mind clear for the first time in weeks. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about taking my life back, and I wasn't going to let them drag me down any further. As I stepped out into the night, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, control. And that, more than anything, was what I needed. But I knew one thing for sure, Logan had just become the hunted. And I wasn't done with him yet. The cold night air hit me like a wave as I stepped out of the club, leaving Logan and Kelly behind in that world of lies and betrayal. For the first time, I felt a sense of control, like I was finally steering my own ship after months of drifting aimlessly through a storm of deceit. My decision to walk away instead of pulling the trigger felt like the right one. But the problem with making decisions in the heat of the moment is that you never really know what the consequences will be until they catch up with you. I didn't make it far. As I walked down the darkened street toward my car, headlights appeared at the far end of the block, creeping slowly toward me. The kind of slow that makes your instincts scream, danger, before your mind even catches up. I paused, my hand reflexively going to the gun in my jacket, but I forced myself to relax. It was probably just someone driving through. This wasn't some movie where the bad guys showed up the second you left a showdown. But the car didn't pass me. It stopped, right in front of me. The tinted window rolled down, and I saw Ray sitting in the driver's seat, staring at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. It wasn't the usual rough, gruff demeanor he'd shown me in our meetings. This was something darker. Calculated. I stepped closer, confused. Ray? What are you doing here? He didn't respond right away. He just sat there, watching me with those cold, dead eyes. Finally, he spoke, his voice flat. Get in, David. My gut twisted, the sense of control I'd felt moments ago slipping away like sand through my fingers. Something was wrong. But before I could say anything, the passenger door swung open, and one of Ray's men stepped out, a guy I hadn't seen before, but he looked like trouble. A silent, hulking figure. I said, "Get in," Ray repeated, this time more forcefully. My mind raced. What the hell was this? I'd hired Ray to handle Logan, to dig into his past, to help me get justice. But this? This felt different. I took a step back, my hand hovering near the gun again, but before I could react, the hulking man moved fast, too fast for someone his size, and grabbed me, shoving me into the back seat of the car. The door slammed shut, and Ray drove off without a word. I tried to process what was happening, but nothing made sense. Why was Ray here? What did he want? I turned to him, my voice sharp. What the hell is going on, Ray? I thought we had a deal. Ray glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. You thought wrong. You've been in over your head from the start, David. You just didn't know it. What are you talking about? Ray smirked, but it wasn't a friendly one. It was the kind of smirk a predator gives just before it goes in for the kill. Logan? He's not just some guy screwing your wife. He's part of something much bigger than you could ever imagine. And now, thanks to you, I'm part of it too. My stomach dropped. I had no idea what he was talking about, but it was clear now, this wasn't just about Logan and Kelly's affair. This was something far more dangerous. Ray, I hired you to help me take down Logan. What's this got to do with you? Ray laughed, but it was humorless. You think I was working for you? You're a pawn, David. A useful idiot. The second you called me, I saw an opportunity. And now, thanks to you, I've got what I need. I stared at him, dread settling in. What did you do? Ray turned down a side street, pulling into an abandoned parking lot. He killed the engine and finally looked back at me, his eyes cold and empty. I didn't have to do much. Just point you in the right direction and let you burn everything down around you. Logan? He was always disposable. But now, I've got everything I need to take over his operation. And as for Kelly? Well, she was just part of the deal. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What deal? Ray leaned back, lighting a cigarette, the smoke curling through the dark air. Kelly and Logan were running something bigger than you ever knew. Money laundering, drug trafficking, you name it. You were just a piece of the puzzle, a way to cause enough chaos for me to slide in and take control. My heart pounded in my chest. What about Kelly? Ray shrugged. She's already gone. I gave her a one-way ticket out of here. Figured she was more useful alive than dead, but don't get your hopes up. She's not coming back to you. I sat there, numb. Kelly was gone. Logan was a pawn. And I had been played from the start. So what happens now? I asked, my voice hollow. Ray blew out a cloud of smoke, his eyes never leaving mine. Now? You disappear, David. You're a loose end, and I don't like loose ends. The hulking man in the passenger seat shifted, reaching into his jacket. I didn't need to see what he was pulling out to know what was coming. My mind raced, every instinct screaming at me to do something, anything. But before I could move, the sound of the gun's hammer clicking back echoed through the car. This was it. I had walked right into a game I never understood, played by rules I never knew existed. And now, in this dark, empty parking lot, it was about to end. Ray smiled that cold, dead smile one last time. Goodbye, David. And then everything went black. In the end, I never saw it coming. The game had been rigged from the start. I was never the hunter. I was always the prey.